The year was 1865, and the wind carried more than dust across the high plains. It carried ghosts. The war was over, or so they said. But for Elias Carter, the frontier had become just another battlefield. Only this one offered no medals, no flags, no songs. Just silence and the endless sweep of land where the horizon bled into the sun. His horse's hooves stirred the earth as he rode back toward the homestead, the saddle leather creaking like old bones. The sky above him burned with the colors of dying light. Clara saw him first through the cabin window, her hands still wet from washing the day's grime off the children's faces. He rode slow, as though the dust itself were holding him back. She knew that look in his eyes before he even dismounted, the look of a man weighing choices heavier than any load a wagon could bear. Inside, the children sat close around the table. Supper was beans and cornbread again, the smell of wood smoke thick in the air. The twins, Josie and May, whispered over their tin cups while little Henry dozed against Clara's shoulder. Annie, the eldest at 10, kept her eyes on the door waiting. When Elias stepped inside, the room changed. His presence filled it, quiet but certain, like a shadow stretching long across the floor. He set his hat on the peg, dusted his hands, and nodded at Clara. "Evening, Dut." She returned the nod, though her eyes searched his face for answers he didn't give. "You're late." "Had to speak with Harlan," he said, sitting down. "They need riders to escort a supply train west, army wagons. Pays better than any cattle drive this side of Dodge." Clara's hand stilled. "And you said yes?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his cup, drank, then met her gaze. "I said I'd think on it." The children exchanged glances, sensing the invisible current between their parents. Clara rose from her chair, moving to the window. Beyond the glass, the prairie stretched wide and unforgiving, the wind combing through the tall grass like fingers. "Elias," she said softly, "you can't go running toward danger every time coin gets tight. The war took enough of you. Of us." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Coin's more than tight, Clara. We're near out of flour, the fence needs mending, and winter will be here before long. You want these children hungry come January?" Her jaw tightened. "I want their father alive." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the slow crackle of the fire. Then Elias stood, his chair scraping against the floorboards. He crossed to her, the lamplight catching the scar on his temple, a souvenir from Shiloh. "You think I want to go?" "I'm tired, Clara. But tired men don't feed their families." Her eyes softened, though tears threatened behind them. "We could make do." "We've been making do for years," he said, "and it's near broken us." From a corner, Annie's small voice broke the silence. "Pa, are we going to move again?" Elias turned to her, and something in his face gentled. "No, sweetheart, not this time." But the words tasted like a lie, even as he said them. After supper, when the children had crawled into their bunks, Elias stepped outside. The night had settled deep and cold, stars scattered thick across the sky. His horse, Boone, stood tethered by the corral, ears twitching toward the distant howl of coyotes. Elias lit a cigarette, the flame reflecting in his eyes like a flicker of doubt. The land smelled of dust and grass and old sorrow. He heard the door creak open behind him. Clara stepped out, wrapping a shawl tight around her shoulders. "They say Cheyenne are moving through again," she said. "Harlan's boy saw smoke upriver yesterday." Elias nodded. "I heard." "You still mean to take that job?" He exhaled a thin stream of smoke. "I ain't decided." Clara came closer, her voice low. "Don't decide with pride, Elias. Decide with what's left of your heart." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman he'd married had been full of laughter once, before the war, before the endless moving west. Now her hair was streaked with dust and worry, her hands calloused from holding a life together with threadbare hope. "I'll think on it," he said again. "Then think hard." She turned and went inside. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, whispering like restless spirits. Beside her, Elias breathed heavy, lost somewhere between dreams and regret. She rose quietly, lit the small oil lamp, and knelt beside the bed where the children slept. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, not for safety, but for strength. Out here, safety was a myth. Strength was survival. Outside, Elias lay awake, staring at the rafters. He could hear her faint whispers and the steady rhythm of Boone's hooves shifting in the dirt. The sound comforted him, the same way the hum of soldiers used to before a battle. The stillness before something broke. Dawn came harsh and golden. The light spilled across the plains like fire. Clara was already outside, hanging laundry that the wind kept trying to steal. The children chased each other near the fence line, laughter cutting through the morning chill. For a moment it felt almost peaceful. Then Boone whinnied sharply. Elias stepped out of the barn, squinting toward the horizon. A cloud of dust was rising, too concentrated for wind. Riders, maybe 4, maybe 5. They weren't moving like travelers. Clara froze when she saw them. Elias! He was already reaching for his rifle. Get the children inside. The riders drew closer, their figures taking shape. Rough men, faces hidden by scarves and hats, rifles slung low. One of them waved lazily as they approached, a mockery of friendliness. Morning, the leader called, his voice oily and sure. Fine place you got here. Elias stood his ground. Keep riding, friend. Ain't nothing for you here. The man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Now that don't sound neighborly. His eyes flicked toward the cabin. Got a family, I see. Must take a fair bit to keep 'em fed. Elias's grip tightened. You're not talking a damn thing. The leader tilted his head. We'll see about that. The sound came next, a metallic click, sharp and cold. Clara's heart jumped. One of the men cocked his rifle, and before Elias could speak, a shot rang out. The world fractured into chaos. Elias staggered back, the bullet tearing into his shoulder. Clara screamed, ducking as splinters flew from the porch rail. The children cried inside the cabin, their small voices cutting through the smoke. Elias dropped to one knee, gritting his teeth against the pain, and fired back. One outlaw spun and fell. Another cursed and fired wildly. Clara grabbed the revolver from a shelf by the door, hands shaking so bad she nearly dropped it. She fired once, the recoil jarring through her arm. The bullet missed, but it was enough. The men hesitated, then turned their horses, retreating into the rising dust. Silence fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the distant echo of hoofbeats fading into nothing. Clara rushed to Elias, pressing her hands against the bleeding wound. You're all right, she whispered, voice trembling. You have to be all right. He met her eyes, pale and unfocused. It's just a graze, he lied, though the blood soaking through his shirt said otherwise. The children crowded at the doorway, faces streaked with tears and dirt. Annie clung to her mother's skirt. Mama, are they gone? Clara nodded, though her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where the sun was climbing fast. They're gone, sweetheart. Elias tried to stand, grimacing. We can't stay, he said, breath ragged. They'll be back. Clara looked at the smoldering barn, the bullet holes in the walls, the blood darkening the dust beneath his boots. She felt the truth in his words settle heavy in her chest. Then we leave, she said quietly, before this land takes more than it already has. Elias looked toward the endless plains, the same horizon he'd fought for, the same one that kept demanding more. Ain't much left for it to take, he murmured. But deep down, they both knew that wasn't true. Not yet. The morning after the attack broke cold and quiet, the kind of silence that pressed heavy on the chest. Smoke still curled from the smoldering wreck of the barn, and the air stank of gunpowder and burnt hay. Elias sat slumped on the porch, his shoulder wrapped in a strip of linen torn from Clara's dress. The pain was sharp, but the heavier wound lay deeper. What little safety they'd built had turned to ash overnight. Boone stood saddled and waiting, restless, as though he too knew it was time to leave. Clara moved quickly, her face pale, but steady. She packed what they could carry, dried beans, water skins, a few blankets, the children's shoes. There wasn't time for grief, not when danger might return with the dawn. Annie tried to help, though her hands shook too much to tie a bundle. The twins clung to her skirts, eyes wide, asking questions Clara couldn't answer. Only little Henry stayed silent, thumb in mouth, gaze fixed on the horizon where the men had vanished. Elias rose unsteadily, gripping the post to keep his balance. "We ride for the river," he said, voice low. "Cross there, then head west. Maybe find a town near Fort Kearny." Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You think they won't follow?" He adjusted the rifle slung over his good shoulder. "If they do, they'll be riding into ghosts. We'll be gone before they catch our tracks." The words were meant to reassure, but they rang hollow. Still, she nodded. She always did when there was no other choice. By sunrise, the family was on the move. The wagon creaked under the weight of what little they owned. Elias rode ahead, eyes scanning the plains. Clara sat in the driver's seat, reins in hand, her jaw set. The children huddled in the back, half asleep, their faces smudged with soot and dust. Behind them, the homestead stood like a tomb, empty, broken, and already being claimed by the wind. They traveled for hours under a sky that stretched too wide. The prairie was a sea of gold and gray, rippling with heat. Occasionally, Elias saw movement in the distance, crows circling, or perhaps riders, but he said nothing. He couldn't afford to spook the children more than they already were. When they stopped at midday, Clara helped him down from Boone. His wound had reopened during the ride. The linen was soaked through. She tore another strip from her dress, cleaned the blood with water from the canteen, and tied it tight. "You should rest," she said. He shook his head. "No time." Her eyes hardened. "You'll be no good to anyone if you fall off the horse dead." He gave a small, weary smile. "If I fall, you'll just drag me anyway." She didn't smile back. "I would." That evening, they made camp near a cluster of cottonwoods by the river. The air was thick with mosquitoes, and the sound of running water mingled with the cries of night birds. Clara built a small fire, careful to keep the flames low. Elias sat nearby, sharpening his knife in slow, deliberate motions, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone the only sound between them. Annie approached, carrying a can of beans. "Mama says eat." He looked up, smiled faintly, and took it. "Your mama's a hard woman." "She has to be," Annie said simply, then turned back toward the fire. He watched her go, his chest tightening. That was his doing, the hardness in her voice, the way she'd stopped flinching at thunder or Ray's voices. Childhood didn't last long out here. The next morning, the river loomed wide and dark, swollen from spring rains. Clara's heart sank at the sight. "It's deeper than you said." Elias studied the water, calculating. "We'll cross slow. Wagon first." The current was faster than it looked. The wheels hit the mud, sank, and stuck fast. The horse reared, neighing in panic. Clara shouted for the children to hold on. Elias jumped from Boone, waded into the freezing current, and pushed against the wheel with his good arm. Water surged around him, cold enough to steal breath. "Come on," he shouted. The wagon lurched forward, then stalled again. Clara lost her grip on Henry. He slipped, tumbling into the river. She screamed and dove after him. For a moment, all Elias saw was a blur of water and motion. Then Clara's hand broke the surface, clutching the boy's arm. He waded toward them, chest burning, grabbed both, and pulled them to the opposite bank. They collapsed together in the mud, coughing, gasping, alive. The other children scrambled across behind them, crying with relief. When they finally caught their breath, Clara turned to Elias, her face pale. "You can't keep bleeding like that." He looked down. The wound had torn open again, crimson soaking through the bandage. He swayed on his knees before collapsing into the grass. The world narrowed to sound, the rustle of leaves, the steady thump of his heartbeat fading. Clara's voice seemed far away. When he woke, it was dusk, the fire burned low, and the children were asleep under the wagon. Clara sat beside him, pressing a cool rag to his forehead. "You nearly bled out," she said quietly. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "We need help," she continued. "We can't do this alone." Before he could answer, a shadow moved at the edge of the firelight. Clara snatched up the rifle, heart pounding. A man stepped forward slowly, palms raised. He was tall, lean, his dark hair tied back, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Put down," Elias rasped weakly. The stranger's voice was calm, deliberate. You bleed. I help. Or you die. Clara hesitated. The man's clothes were worn buckskin, his moccasins caked with dust. A necklace of carved bone hung at his throat. "What are you?" she asked, the fear plain in her tone. "Cheyenne," he said simply. "Name Tehan." Her finger hovered near the trigger. "Why would you help us?" He shrugged. "Not all killing makes sense. Not all helping does, either." Elias coughed, blood on his lips. Clara let him. Reluctantly, she lowered the rifle. Tehan knelt beside Elias, inspecting the wound with practiced care. He poured something dark and pungent over it, burning herbs that made Elias hiss through his teeth, then pressed a heated knife against the flesh. The smell of cauterized skin filled the air. Clara turned away, tears stinging her eyes. When it was done, Tehan sat back silent. Elias breathed shallowly but steady. Clara looked at the stranger, unsure whether to thank him or fear him. As the fire burned low, Tehan spoke softly. "Soldiers came last winter, burned my camp, took my wife, my son, said we were enemies. Now you bleed same way." Elias opened his eyes, weary but alert. "I was a soldier once." "I know," Tehan said. "I see it in your eyes." For a long time, no one spoke. The river whispered nearby, the prairies stretching endless beyond the firelight. Clara handed Tehan a cup of water. He drank, nodded once in gratitude. An unspoken understanding settled between them. Not trust, but necessity. Out here, survival didn't ask for friendship, it demanded it. As the stars turned overhead, Clara sat awake, watching the horizon. Elias slept beside her, breathing easier now. Tehan sat at the edge of camp, sharpening his knife, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the trees. Somewhere in that silence, Clara realized what the frontier truly was. Not a place to live, but a line to be crossed again and again, until there was nothing left to give but everything you were. The night lay heavy upon the plains, a dark quilt stitched with dying embers of stars. The wind moved low across the valley, whispering through the brittle grass, carrying the scent of gunpowder and regret. Matthew stood near the dying fire, one hand resting on his holster, the other clutching the worn locket that had belonged to Clara. Inside, her face smiled back, untouched by dust or distance. He hadn't slept in 2 days. There was no rest left in a man hunted by his past. The sound of hooves broke the silence. Jacob, the boy rode in fast, a silhouette swallowed by dawn's first gray. "They're coming," he said, breathless. 3 riders, Harlan's men. Matthew's jaw tightened. "You sure?" Jacob nodded, his eyes glinting with fear and a kind of strange pride. "They got that black horse, the one you shot at the river." Matthew turned to the hills, the rising sun bleeding gold over the ridges. "Then, this is it." He strapped the gun belt tight, checked the rounds, felt the weight settle against his hip. "Wake your ma. Tell her to get the kids to the river bend. If they cross by noon, they'll be clear." Jacob hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind," Matthew said. But his tone betrayed the lie. He'd always been too slow when it mattered. By the time the riders appeared on the horizon, Clara had the wagon moving. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Every glance backward was a wound reopening. She clutched the reins, urging the horses harder through the shallow stream. Her children huddled beneath the canvas cover. The sound of gunfire cracked through the air like thunder splitting the sky. She flinched. Then again, another shot and another. Matthew stood his ground on the ridge, the sun now full and merciless. Dust rose around him as the riders closed in. 3 against 1, but he'd never been the kind to count numbers. Harlan's lead man, Griggs, rode out front, a smirk cutting across his scarred face. "You should have kept running, Kane," he called, spitting to the side. "Could have died tired instead of stupid." Matthew didn't answer. Words were wasted on men who sold their souls for coin. His hand hovered near his revolver, fingers steady. Time seemed to fold into silence. Then the world broke apart in motion. The first bullet grazed his shoulder. The second tore through Griggs' chest before he could blink. Matthew moved like he'd trained himself to stop thinking years ago. His revolver barked again. One rider fell, clutching his throat, eyes wide and disbelieving. The third circled wide, firing wild, but Matthew ducked low, rolling behind a boulder. He waited for the telltale click of an empty chamber. Then he rose, aimed, and ended it. When the dust settled, 3 bodies lay twisted among the sagebrush. Matthew's arm bled, but he was still standing. He holstered the revolver slowly, scanning the ridges for movement. There was none, only the whisper of the wind, indifferent and eternal. He turned toward the river. He had to move. The family would be waiting or gone. He didn't know which hope hurt worse. He mounted his horse, the old bay groaning beneath him, and rode hard. By midday, the heat shimmered off the sand like glass. The river bend came into view, a ribbon of silver cutting through the brown wasteland. The wagon tracks led straight to it, then vanished where the water grew deep. For a heartbeat, Matthew feared the worst. Then he saw them, across the far bank, a cluster of figures moving into the tree line. Safe. He slowed the horse, watching. Clara turned once. Their eyes met across the distance, a moment suspended in the shimmer of light. No words reached between them, but everything that mattered was said in that silence. Forgiveness, love, the knowing that some goodbyes were too sacred for speech. He might have crossed then, might have ridden into that uncertain future, laid his ghosts to rest. But fate wasn't done. From the ridge behind, a shot rang out. The bullet struck his horse, sending it crashing down. Matthew hit the ground hard, rolling to cover. The crack of another rifle echoed. Harlan's voice followed, rough and cold. "I told you I'd find you, Kane." Matthew crawled to a rock outcrop, breath ragged, vision blurring. He saw Harlan's shape against the light, broad, confident, the kind of man who mistook cruelty for control. Matthew drew his gun, feeling the last of his strength coiled tight in his chest. "You should have left her be," Matthew called, voice low but steady. "She was mine first," Harlan spat. "You stole her, just like you stole that land. But I always take back what's mine." A pause stretched thin as wire. The wind carried dust between them. Then came the final exchange. 2 shots, almost simultaneous. The echo thundered through the valley. When the smoke cleared, Harlan stood for a heartbeat, hand at his chest, disbelief on his face. Then he fell. Matthew staggered, clutching his side. Blood seeped warm between his fingers. He sank to one knee, the horizon swaying. Across the river, Clara screamed his name. Jacob broke from the trees, running toward the water, but Clara held him back, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. She knew. So did he. Matthew smiled faintly. The sky above burned with color, gold melting into crimson. He thought of the ranch they never built, the laughter that never filled their nights. He thought of Clara's hands, of Jacob's stubborn courage, of the way hope could survive even after everything else was gone. He lay back, the earth cool beneath him. His breath slowed. The wind moved softly, carrying the sound of the river, the voices of his family fading into distance. Somewhere in that silence, he found peace. By the time the sun dipped low again, Clara and the children had crossed safely into the trees. She stood for a long while on the bank, watching the ridge. No smoke, no movement, only the endless hum of the frontier, the place that had taken everything and somehow given her strength to go on. Jacob came to her side, clutching his father's hat, the one he'd found floating downstream. "What now, Ma?" he asked quietly. She looked east, toward the horizon where the sky met the unknown. "Now," she said, her voice steady despite the ache. "We live." That's what he'd want. They walked on, their silhouettes fading into the wilderness. Behind them, the wind rose again, carrying the dust, the echoes, the memories of those who'd lived and lost and loved in a land that asked too much. And somewhere, perhaps in the hearts of those who listened long after, the story of Matthew Kane lived on, not as a legend nor a warning, but as a truth whispered by the frontier itself. Some words are lost to time, but love leaves its mark in the dust. So, what do we take from this tale? Maybe it's this: the frontier wasn't just a place, but a reckoning. A mirror for the choices that define us, the ones that demand everything and give nothing back. And if it moved you, remember their story. Like it, share it, carry it forward. Because even in the dust of the frontier, not all things are lost.